9/10 of South Africa's economic growth over the last 20 years is explained by growth in consumer spending and government spending. 9/10 of growth is consumption and government. Neither of those are sustainable, and neither of those contribute to the development of productive capability. So that number that you see in front of you, that 90%, is, I think, one of the bankable numbers. That despite this very elevated economic growth, I would venture that on the back of the savings index research, that growth is artificial and unsustainable. Moreover, the 3.3 economic growth that we've achieved over that period pales in comparison to many of our comparator economies. Here in this lineup, we show you the performance of per capita income growth for the BRICS and the MINTs: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria, Turkey. The MINTs, of course, are the new rock stars on Wall Street. And whether you consider the BRICS or the MINTs, depending on your bias or preferences, in every instance, South Africa's growth per person falls shy of the mark. Only Mexico ranks below us, and they come off a much higher base. The reason why we show you per capita income growth is growth in per capita income is an easy way to assess whether a country is going in the right direction. And if your and my per capita income is going upwards and we are able to buy more with that per capita income, which is why we adjusted for purchasing power parity, then our standards of living are improving. And make no mistake, by that measure, South Africans' standards of living are improving, but not nearly as quickly as the BRIC and MINT comparators. A second point to make about competitiveness is if this economy is consumption-fed and government-led, then we could suspect that South Africa's competitiveness is falling. And there are many ways in which you can measure competitiveness, but arguably one of the most robust and easily accessible is just to ask, well, what is South Africa's share of export market? Because you can shelter domestic industry, but it's hard to promote domestic industry in international markets and sustain that promotion unless they establish true competitiveness. And so the easy measure here is to ask, what is South Africa's share of world export market? And here's the number, that the share of world export market falls from 1.6% in the 1970s to about 0.4% today. Importantly, it is not a sudden decline. Instead, it is a steady erosion. And I say that that's important because it hints then that the explanation in South Africa's story is structural rather than cyclical. And so we should go and look for the real culprits rather than a smoking gun. And the real culprit, we venture by building the Investec GIBS Savings Index, is the savings that's missing in action. Conventional wisdom says you spend yourself to prosperity. It's hard to imagine that the way to establish sustained affluence, to achieve competitiveness, is to defer your gratification. That you don't go shopping, that instead you stay home, and that saving is banked, and that banked saving turns into sustained growth. If we are able to achieve sustained growth, our evidence suggests that this 5.4 is a sustainable number, that it is well within our reach. And it's not just that the argument is in favor of elevated growth. Importantly, that elevated growth needs to come with economic inclusion. And the economic inclusion will come by the way of saving as a broad culture being established. And that saving as a broad culture being established leads to a second ingredient that's missing in action in South Africa, that is the establishment of small business. The single most important explainer of economic growth over sustained periods in any economy is investment spending. And the R squared here for the statisticians in the room is 0.73, or 73% of economic growth across these countries that you see here that range from Slovenia to South Africa to China to Estonia. 73% of economic growth is explained by investment spending. That's important. What then explains investment spending? Well, here's the relationship between saving and investment spending. The only source of funding investment is someone's saving. It's either your own or someone else's. If I want to build a business, investment spending, I either need to have saved or I need to go and find a funder of my investment, meaning I need to access someone else's saving. And so here is the strong, equally strong positive relationship between saving and investment spending. If investment spending and economic growth, that relationship holds strong across a number of countries, saving and investment spending relationship holds equally strong across an equally impressive range of countries that spans from Hong Kong to South Korea to Malta. South Africa is in trouble. When you look at the historical record of the economy, and the data that you see here spans over many decades, there was a time when South Africa was in the business of producing 25%, 30% savings rate, which translates into 25, 30% investment spending. And that translates into strong economic growth for the South African economy. You'll appreciate quickly that the relationship between these two curves, which maps investment spending per year and saving rate per year, is pretty much one-to-one, reinforcing the point that saving and investment go hand in hand. Look at the recent path, and you'll see that in the last 20 years, saving has steadily fallen off. So that the saving rate in South Africa today is 16.3%. This puts us as one of the lowest saving rates in the world, and that corresponds with an investment rate of about 18%. This is not nearly enough to fund 5% economic growth. In fact, an 18% investment rate will fund 2% economic growth. And there is the economics rabbit out the hat. Ta-da! If you want to know the structural growth rate of the South African economy, here it is. It's an 16-18 relationship. What does South Africa need then if we want to get to that 5.4? Well, if you delve into the index, you'll see from the work that Tulani, Kelly, and I have done that the required rate of saving is closer to 30% than the current 15. And the 15 and 30 I give you as poetic proxies. We are 2/3 of the way to being aspirational superstars. 63.4 is by no means an unmitigated disaster, but it leaves a lot of money on the table, or it walks straight past a yawning opportunity. And the opportunity is our ability to convert the 2% economic growth that we have got into the business and habit of delivering into the 5.4 that we write about. There's the track across time, and perhaps a sad observation or a somber moment in constructing this index is the recognition that the most recent print of 63.4 is the lowest number that we have for this index series. Our suspicion that South Africa is in a tough patch then is perhaps reinforced by this 63.4 observation. In other words, it's not only time for reflection, it's also a chance to do something about that observation. Any self-respecting economist can't help but try and fit a trend line through it. And so we put a trend line through this, and what we find is that although the index bumps around over the years, it does migrate from mid-70s down to mid-60s and back up again and then back down to mid-60s. So it does have this sort of breathe in, breathe out motion. The structural trend line is slowly downwards, telling you or supporting the earlier observation about the export pattern of the South African economy, that we are losing our competitive edge, and that loss of competitive edge can be explained, we would venture, effectively by this missing powerful ingredient, investment, which is underscored by this critical component, saving.